She's lucky they let her in." The words dripped with arrogance as Evelyn Cole crossed the ballroom she quietly paid for. Minutes later, her name echoed through the room beside a donation that shattered the Whitfield's legacy. The cameras turned, the crowd froze, and the woman they belittled became the story. Stay with us, because what begins as humiliation can end in power, and every woman they tried to silence deserves to be remembered, not erased. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever taken back your own story and rewritten it on your terms? Tell us below. And before you go, like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with Love, and ring that notification bell for more stories that celebrate strength, dignity, and the beauty of rising above. The chandeliers glowed like frozen rain suspended in air, each crystal drop catching and scattering the light until the entire ballroom shimmered with wealth. Every table gleamed with gold-edged china, every laugh floated carefully rehearsed. The air itself seemed perfumed with pride. The night was titled Legacy Through Giving, a celebration of generosity for those who already owned everything. Yet beneath the satin gowns and diamond smiles, legacy was not about charity. It was about bloodlines. It was about who belonged. Evelyn Cole stepped into that golden illusion with the grace of a woman who had long learned how to move in rooms that tested her worth. Her skin glowed under the light like burnished copper kissed by warmth, and her gown of deep onyx silk followed her with the hush of confidence. Every step carried purpose. Every tilt of her chin defied expectation. Eyes trailed her with curiosity, admiration, and the sharp edges of scrutiny. She was not from their world, not shaped by the same inherited comfort that had built this house of chandeliers and champagne. Yet her calm presence unsettled the room more than any scandal could. The walls were lined with portraits of the Whitfield family, founders of old estates and older reputations. From their gilded frames, they watched over the crowd with the stillness of privilege passed down through centuries. Evelyn let her gaze linger on one of the portraits, a matriarch painted in cream silk and pearls. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her, cool and disapproving. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn felt the echo of all the times she had been studied, measured, and quietly doubted. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked deeper into the light. The sound of a violin swelled across the marble, soft but commanding. Waiters in white gloves passed with silver trays held high. Conversations drifted like perfume through the air, full of names that carried weight. Evelyn listened as she moved, each exchange a reminder that this was not a gathering for change, but a performance of virtue. She could feel the hush that followed her wherever she went, the subtle shift of tone when someone realized she was not a name from their circle. At the center of the room, Margaret Whitfield stood beside her husband, her laughter as crisp as the bubbles in her glass. Her gown shimmered in pale gold, the perfect contrast to Evelyn's dark elegance. When Margaret's eyes found her across the room, her smile tightened just slightly. It was the kind of smile that welcomed and dismissed in the same breath. Evelyn returned it with a calm expression that revealed nothing. A waiter passed and Evelyn took a glass from the tray, her reflection catching briefly in the polished stemware. Around her, the orchestra's melody lifted higher, filling the vaulted ceiling with a sound both beautiful and distant. She felt the pulse of the evening quicken, the weight of unseen stories pressing around her. Yet her composure held. For a moment, the crowd seemed to fade. The chandeliers blurred into soft light. Evelyn stood still, the hum of whispers dimming to a single breath of silence. It was in that stillness that the room revealed itself to her. The power that lived here was not in kindness, but in control. Yet she carried a power that required neither. It was quieter, deeper, and it belonged to no lineage. As the music swelled again, Evelyn lifted her head and stepped forward. The night had no idea that it was about to remember her name. The orchestra played a waltz that moved like honey through the air, its rhythm guiding the crowd into the illusion of grace. Evelyn drifted between clusters of laughter and half-finished sentences, her name still echoing in whispers that thought themselves discreet. She was accustomed to curiosity that masqueraded as conversation. It did not touch her now. Her composure held the same weight as the chandeliers above, fragile only in appearance but anchored by steel. James watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable beneath the easy charm he had perfected since boyhood. His family's fortune had built this mansion, its marble floors, its gold-laced walls. He knew every guest by name, every story by inheritance. Yet tonight, his attention did not belong to them. It belonged to the woman who carried silence like an armor and looked unbothered by the hierarchy his world worshipped. He felt the sharp pull of recognition, though he could not name it. It was not desire, not yet. It was the unsettling awareness of truth when it stands too close. Margaret Whitfield's laughter rose above the music, smooth and brittle. She was surrounded by women wrapped in diamonds, their conversations circling philanthropy and couture with equal vanity. Evelyn passed by, the sound of her heels steady and sure. Margaret's eyes flicked toward her, assessing, then dismissing, but the faint lift of her eyebrow betrayed irritation. The audacity of someone walking through her ballroom with such calm, without seeking approval, without asking permission. A waiter offered Evelyn champagne. She accepted with a slight nod, her fingers brushing the stem, her posture composed as she turned toward the silent auction display. Beneath the glass cases shimmered prizes that promised indulgence disguised as generosity. A Tuscan villa retreat, a private sailing experience, a limited edition diamond necklace. She paused before a framed image of a half-built schoolhouse, one of the few items connected to a real cause. Her reflection merged with the photograph. A child's smile blurred into her own face, and for a moment, she saw the life behind the luxury this room claimed to support. Across the hall, James found himself moving without intention. He reached the same display moments later, standing just behind her. The scent of her perfume was faint, like rain on cedar. When she turned slightly, their eyes met. No words passed, only recognition. The noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by the hum of awareness. She saw in him the question he did not yet dare to ask. He saw in her the quiet refusal to explain herself to anyone. Then the spell broke. Margaret's voice floated through the air again, calling attention to the evening's first toast. Guests gathered, champagne glasses lifted like trophies. Evelyn stepped back, blending into the crowd, though her presence seemed to draw every gaze again. James raised his glass with the rest, but his eyes searched for her reflection in the crystal surface. When the applause followed, Evelyn smiled faintly. It was not for the speech or the wealth it celebrated. It was for herself, for the knowledge that she had entered their world not as an intruder, but as a mirror, and what she reflected unsettled them more than they could admit. The music swelled again, a polished cover for the discomfort that lingered after Margaret's slight. The air had thickened with the delicate scent of roses and embarrassment, though no one dared to name it. Guests returned to their conversations, pretending not to have witnessed the quiet exchange that revealed more than any speech could. Evelyn moved away from the auction table, her glass steady in her hand, her posture perfectly composed. She could feel eyes on her still, curious, calculating, whispering behind crystal flutes. The room always did that when dignity appeared where it was least expected. James followed her at a distance, his conscience pacing faster than his feet. The words his mother had spoken replayed in his mind, not as isolated cruelty, but as the echo of something older. The family name had built rooms like this, rooms where civility masked exclusion, where grace was demanded but rarely returned. He had grown up believing kindness and class were the same thing. Tonight he saw the difference for the first time. Evelyn reached the edge of the ballroom where the light dimmed to a softer gold. The orchestra's melody drifted through the air like smoke, wrapping the space in false serenity. She stood near a marble column and drew a slow breath, the kind that anchored her when the world tried to shake her balance. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass. The reflection in the surface showed not defeat, but control. She had learned long ago that silence, when chosen, was power. James approached, his hesitation visible in the angle of his shoulders. The air between them carried the weight of everything unsaid. When he spoke, his voice was softer than the music, yet clear enough for her to hear. His words held no pity, only respect. Evelyn turned to him, her expression calm, her eyes sharp enough to pierce through the layers of practiced politeness surrounding them. Her answer was steady, her tone a truth that needed no defense. Grace was not surrender. It was strength, shaped by restraint. For a moment they stood like that, two figures framed in gold light, an unspoken understanding forming between them. Around them, the evening continued its performance. Margaret laughed too loudly at something unfunny. Charles clinked glasses with a senator whose donation would be printed in tomorrow's paper. Waiters glided across the floor, careful not to disturb the illusion that this was a night about giving rather than appearance. Evelyn placed her glass on a nearby tray and straightened, the movement small yet commanding. The chatter softened as she crossed the room again, the ripple of her presence undeniable. James watched her go, the edges of his certainty unraveling. For the first time, he saw the cracks in the marble of his family's legacy. The chandeliers caught her in their light once more as she paused near the grand staircase. For all their grandeur, they could not outshine her calm defiance. The night belonged to people who measured worth in wealth and lineage, yet all their rules were undone by the poise of one woman who refused to bow. The crowd returned to its rhythm, but the silence she left behind hummed with a truth that would not fade. The laughter at the table lingered longer than it should have, filling the air with a brittle sound that fractured the music drifting from the orchestra. Evelyn felt it crawl across her skin like static. Every smile around her gleamed too brightly. Every compliment carried the hollow tone of performance. She had been in enough rooms like this to recognize mockery dressed in elegance. Margaret's voice, smooth and lilting, continued its slow, calculated dance through the conversation, each word carefully shaped to remind everyone of their places. Evelyn lifted her glass again, her expression composed, the movement deliberate. The chandelier light caught the rim, throwing fractured reflections across her face. To anyone watching, she was the picture of calm civility, but inside her thoughts churned like waves under glass. She knew this moment well, the point where silence was mistaken for submission. It was not fear that held her back. It was choice. Her stillness was not surrender. It was preparation. James shifted in his seat, the scrape of his cufflink faint against the linen. He had never seen his mother so unrestrained, so openly cruel beneath the mask of charm. For years he had believed her sharpness was protection, a performance of authority. But as he watched Evelyn absorb every word without lowering her gaze, something in him fractured. He felt the burn of embarrassment on his own skin, though none of the words had been aimed at him. A waiter refilled their glasses, and Evelyn nodded her thanks, her voice even and low. The sound of it seemed to quiet the space around her for an instant. Margaret continued to talk, gesturing with her hand as if the world revolved around the flick of her manicured fingers. Yet beneath the table, her own nerves betrayed her. She was not used to being met with silence that felt like power. The conversation turned to donations, to recognition, to legacy. Names of foundations and benefactors floated across the table like currency. Evelyn's was not among them, though it should have been. Her foundation had built classrooms in countries few of these guests could locate on a map. She had stood barefoot on concrete floors where children spelled hope with chalk. Yet here, none of that mattered. Here, legacy meant lineage, and generosity was a costume. Her heart pounded with quiet rhythm. The burn in her chest was not anger but clarity. She watched Margaret laugh again, the glint of diamonds at her wrist catching the candlelight, and she understood that power wielded carelessly would always collapse under its own weight. She leaned back slightly, her posture soft but unyielding, her eyes steady on the woman across from her. When the waiter placed dessert before them, Evelyn lifted her fork, but did not eat. Her appetite had turned to resolve. Around her, conversation hummed on, oblivious to the shift taking place. Something in the air had changed. Margaret could feel it, but did not yet understand why. James did. The balance had tilted, quietly, irrevocably. Evelyn's grace had not been a shield. It had been the soundless drawing of a blade that no one saw until it was too late. The call ended with a soft chime, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the corridor. Evelyn lowered her phone and drew a breath that carried both release and resolve. The marble floor beneath her gleamed, its reflection catching the hem of her gown as she turned back toward the ballroom doors. Behind them waited the same sea of polished faces, the same laughter that floated on bubbles of champagne and self-satisfaction. Yet something had shifted. The air felt thinner now, charged. She had crossed an invisible line that no one in that room even knew existed. The door attendant straightened as she entered again. The orchestra had moved on to a slower melody, a waltz, painted in soft strings. The donors sat bathed in candlelight, their jewels winking like tiny stars. Evelyn moved through them like a current through still water. The clinking of glassware softened as eyes followed her again, drawn by something they could not name. Her presence carried weight now, not because of wealth or title, but because of calm authority that refused to bend. At the head table, Margaret reclined in her chair, laughter frozen at the sight of Evelyn's return. She turned to whisper something to her husband, her voice low and dismissive, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed a sliver of unease. Across from her, James's gaze found Evelyn immediately. He could not explain why, but her expression told him the evening was about to turn. It was subtle, yet unmistakable. The quiet certainty of someone who had already chosen victory. The auctioneer stepped back to the podium, his polished voice filling the room once more. The next and final item of the evening appeared on the screen behind him. Sponsorship for a new children's hospital wing. A hush spread through the crowd. This was the moment the Whitfields had been waiting for, their grand display of benevolence. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her smile returning as the bidding began. Numbers rose like clockwork, each increase greeted with polite applause. Evelyn stood near the back, still as glass, watching. When the room paused, waiting for the expected final bid from the hosts, Evelyn's voice carried through the silence. It was calm and clear, yet it sliced through the murmurs like a single note in a choir. 2 million. The words floated, deliberate and unwavering. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily unsure if he had heard correctly. Heads turned, whispers spread. Margaret's smile faltered, her hand still mid-gesture. Evelyn took a step forward, her heels striking marble with quiet command. She did not look at Margaret. She looked at the screen that displayed the cause, the one reason she had entered this charade of charity at all. The children whose names would never be spoken in rooms like this. The laughter that once surrounded her now stilled. Even the orchestra seemed to hold its breath. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice trembling slightly as he confirmed the bid. Applause began. Hesitant, uncertain, then growing. James was the first to stand, his hands meeting together in steady rhythm. The rest followed, each clap echoing against the vaulted ceiling until the room trembled with the sound. Evelyn's gaze remained forward, serene and unbroken. She had not raised her voice, yet she had silenced them all. The sound of Evelyn's words lingered in the air, refusing to fade. For a moment, even the chandeliers seemed to pause their glittering dance. The auctioneer cleared his throat, fumbling for composure, while every gaze in the ballroom turned toward the woman who had just rewritten the evening with a sentence. Her posture remained effortless, her face calm, her dark gown reflecting the golden light like quiet armor. The Cole Foundation. The name moved through the crowd in murmurs, rolling from table to table, reshaping assumptions with every repetition. Margaret's expression faltered, the practiced smile at her lips tightening into something brittle. She leaned slightly toward Charles, whispering words meant for discretion but delivered with a strain that did not escape notice. His husband's eyes narrowed, calculating, his jaw working as he tried to assess the shift that had just occurred. Their moment, their stage, had been stolen not through confrontation, but through grace. Evelyn had given them what they could not give themselves, authenticity. The auctioneer, regaining his rhythm, announced the bid again for confirmation. His voice shook, the script of the evening now abandoned. 2 million, pledged in full by the Cole Foundation. Applause hesitated at first, uncertain whether to rise or restrain itself. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. James stood near the edge of the stage, his gaze steady, his palms striking together with conviction. The sound echoed across the marble until others followed, one by one, applause building like a tide that no one could resist. Evelyn's eyes moved across the crowd, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. She did not bow or gesture for attention. Instead, she nodded once toward the screen displaying the hospital project, her gaze fixed on the image of children smiling beneath the words, "Hope for tomorrow." The applause grew louder, swelling until even Margaret was forced to lift her hands and join in, the motion mechanical, her smile painted back into place. James could not look away. Her restraint, her precision, her refusal to gloat, all of it cut deeper than any act of defiance could have. In her silence, she had drawn a boundary between dignity and spectacle, and the entire room now stood on the wrong side of it. He watched his mother's discomfort harden into something colder, a realization that no amount of wealth could outshine presence. When the applause finally ebbed, the orchestra began to play again, though the music now felt different, softer, reverent. The auctioneer continued, his words trembling with awe. Margaret lifted her glass, pretending control, but her reflection in the crystal revealed something unsteady. Evelyn had not only taken the night, she had changed its story. Evelyn moved toward the back of the room, the crowd parting instinctively, the whisper of her gown brushing against the marble. For the first time, no one looked through her. Every glance met her as though seeing her for the first time. Near the staircase, she paused, her hand grazing the banister, the light catching the faint smile at the corner of her lips. The Whitfield's legacy had been built on grandeur and inheritance. Evelyn's had been earned through purpose. Tonight, under the shimmer of crystal and pretense, the difference between the two became undeniable. The call ended with a soft chime, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the applause rolled through the ballroom like a tide breaking against the walls, its rhythm uneven at first, then swelling until it filled every corner of the gilded hall. The orchestra hesitated, unsure whether to continue, while flashes from cameras began to scatter across the room like bursts of lightning. Evelyn did not flinch. Her stillness drew the eye more powerfully than any speech could have. She had not raised her voice, yet she had shifted the ground beneath their feet. Margaret's hands met in slow, brittle claps, her smile thin enough to crack. The ring on her finger glinted each time her palms touched, a reminder of wealth that suddenly felt fragile. Around her, guests exchanged looks heavy with the discomfort of awakening. The performance of generosity had ended, and truth now stood under the chandeliers in black silk and composure. Charles leaned toward his wife, his whisper tight, a quiet plea for dignity that came too late. Evelyn inclined her head slightly toward the auctioneer, her voice soft but clear enough to reach the farthest table. "The funds will be transferred by morning." The sentence carried the finality of a door closing. Murmurs rippled through the guests as if they had all forgotten how to speak in her presence. She turned then, scanning the crowd not for validation, but for meaning. Her eyes found the image on the projection screen again, the smiling faces of children she had never met, but already loved more fiercely than this room could understand. James stepped closer, his expression caught between admiration and apology. The noise faded around him, leaving only the echo of his own heartbeat. He wanted to speak, but understood that words would only disturb the purity of what had just unfolded. His mother's empire had always been built on control, yet this moment belonged to someone who needed none. The MC tried to recover, stumbling into polite formalities as the orchestra resumed playing. Guests returned to their seats, though the atmosphere had changed. Conversations grew cautious, measured, their brightness dimmed by awareness. Every person in the room now understood that they had witnessed something larger than charity. They had seen power revealed not through money, but through grace. Margaret reached for her champagne, her fingers trembling slightly. She took a slow sip, eyes fixed on Evelyn as if trying to reclaim authority through observation, but the illusion had shattered. The woman she had dismissed now owned the narrative of the night, and no smile or headline could undo it. Evelyn crossed the floor once more, every step deliberate, her gown whispering across marble. The applause returned, softer now, almost reverent. A photographer captured her in motion, the camera flash illuminating her calm face against the sea of astonished expressions behind her. The image would travel farther than any invitation to the Whitfield ball ever had. At the edge of the room, she paused and turned slightly, her gaze resting on the crowd that had underestimated her. The silence that followed was not one of discomfort, but of realization. Power had changed hands quietly, invisibly, and completely. Evelyn exhaled, the corners of her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. Tonight she had not entered their world, she had made it her own. The music resumed softly, an elegant disguise for the discomfort rippling beneath the chandeliers. Margaret lingered for a breath too long, her smile frozen between civility and defeat. Evelyn's response had landed with precision, not as a wound, but as revelation. Around them, conversations stumbled back into motion, though no one spoke with quite the same ease. The illusion of hierarchy had cracked, and everyone could feel the draft of truth seeping through. Evelyn turned slightly, her reflection catching in a nearby mirror. The woman staring back was the same, yet different. The weight she had carried into the night had lifted, leaving behind the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her foundation had always been about impact, not applause, but tonight had shown her that power needed no permission to stand visible. Margaret retreated to her table, her laughter pitched too high as she tried to reclaim her place among the guests. Yet her companions watched her differently now. Their smiles were polite, their eyes curious, cautious, newly calculating. James noticed the shift from across the room. He saw his mother, once the sun around which this world revolved, now orbiting a new center. His gaze followed Evelyn instead, drawn not by fascination, but by understanding. She had moved to the edge of the ballroom where the light fell softer. Guests approached her in hesitant succession, their greetings thick with the sweetness of belated respect. A man from a major corporation extended his hand, offering to collaborate. A socialite gushed about philanthropy. Evelyn accepted their gestures with warmth, but her attention remained grounded. She had long learned to measure sincerity by silence, not praise. James approached then, his steps measured, his face unguarded. The noise of the room dimmed in her presence, not because she demanded it, but because calm followed her like gravity. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if he was intruding. Her expression softened, a signal that no one else would have noticed. "You've changed the tone of the entire evening," he said quietly. She tilted her head, her voice even. The tone needed changing. He smiled faintly, recognizing both the truth and the grace in her words. For the first time, he saw the event for what it truly was, a performance built on appearance, now rewritten by authenticity. Margaret's eyes flicked toward them from her table, her jaw tight. The sight of her son standing beside the woman who had undone her vanity in less than an hour stung more than any insult could. But Evelyn's gaze never reached her again. She had already moved beyond the need for acknowledgement. As the evening drew to its end, Evelyn stepped toward the grand staircase leading to the exit. Her gown trailed like a shadow of quiet triumph. The air outside the ballroom was cool, touched with the scent of jasmine and distant rain. James watched her go, the echo of her heels fading into the night. For everyone else, the evening had been about charity. For Evelyn Cole, it had been about reclaiming narrative, and she had done it with silence that spoke louder than legacy. The air outside carried the faint scent of rain and perfume, a mix of endings and renewal. The city glowed through the mist, every reflection stretching like a memory across the slick pavement. Evelyn walked slowly down the steps, her heels tapping against marble, her gown trailing in ripples of black silk that shimmered beneath the streetlights. Each drop that landed on her skin felt like a quiet absolution, washing away the weight of pretense that had hung over the night. Behind her, the grand doors of Whitfield Manor opened briefly, releasing a final note of laughter before closing again. The sound was faint, almost ghostly now, swallowed by the hum of the rain. She did not look back. Inside that house, the performance would continue. The wine poured, the stories embellished to soften pride. But the truth had already left the building with her. James lingered at the top of the stairs, his hand resting on the railing. The rain blurred his view of her, yet he could still make out the silhouette moving gracefully across the courtyard. There was something magnetic about her calm defiance, the way she carried herself without needing the world's permission. He had spent his life surrounded by people who sought control, yet here was a woman who embodied freedom simply by choosing not to chase it. He descended slowly, his shoes echoing softly behind her, until he stood only a few steps away. The rain caught his hair, darkening it, flattening the precision his mother adored. Evelyn turned slightly, her face illuminated by the lamplight, droplets glistening along her jaw. Neither spoke for a moment. Words would have felt too small for what lingered between them. Finally, she looked up toward the clouds. The faintest smile curved her lips. "Tonight, the city feels honest," she said softly. James's chest tightened at the simplicity of it. Honest was not a word he had ever used for this world. For the first time, he wondered what it might be like to build something without masks. A car slowed near the curb, its driver stepping out to open the door for her. She nodded in thanks, her gaze lingering on James a second longer. There was understanding in it, the kind that carried no promise but left a mark all the same. She stepped into the car, the door closing with quiet finality. As the vehicle pulled away, James remained where he was, the rain soaking into his suit. He watched the taillights fade into the fog, red against silver mist, until only the rhythm of raindrops remained. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the evening had not been about money or charity or legacy. It had been about clarity. Evelyn's name would appear in the headlines by morning, but it was not fame she had earned. It was truth. Her act of grace had revealed what power could look like when untethered from privilege. And as the rain continued to fall, steady and cleansing, James finally understood what she had meant. The world had not changed. It had simply been seen for what it truly was. The morning light broke softly through the city skyline, tinting the glass towers in gold. Newspapers lay folded on breakfast tables across town, their glossy pages filled with the story everyone suddenly wanted to claim they had witnessed firsthand. Headlines spoke of generosity, but the photographs told another tale entirely. Evelyn Cole, poised in black silk beneath the chandeliers, her expression calm and luminous, her eyes unshaken. The woman who had turned charity into truth. Her image eclipsed the hosts she had outshone without trying. At the Whitfield estate, Margaret sat before her untouched tea. The newspaper spread across the table like a verdict. Her name was printed second. For the first time, she understood how heavy that could feel. Across from her, Charles read in silence, his expression grim. He had been in this world long enough to know that reputation was the currency they valued most, and theirs had lost value overnight. The guests who had once sought their favor now spoke of Evelyn's grace instead, her composure, her quiet brilliance. The same people who had laughed at Margaret's jokes now quoted Evelyn's words as if they were scripture. James entered the room, his phone already buzzing with messages from business partners and friends. He glanced at the paper and then at his mother, his voice low but steady. "You could learn something from her." Margaret's head lifted sharply, her pride flashing for a moment before giving way to something smaller, almost uncertain. She wanted to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Deep down, she knew he was right. Across the city, Evelyn sat by her window, a cup of coffee cooling beside her. She had already read the headlines, but felt no thrill from them. The noise of attention was temporary. What mattered was the impact that would last long after the spotlight dimmed. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists, donors, invitations to galas she would never attend. She silenced it and turned her focus to the morning light spilling across her desk. The call she wanted to make was already forming in her mind. Not to a reporter, but to a small town where a half-finished school waited for funding. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the world washed and still. She thought of the ballroom, of the eyes that had followed her, and of the silence that had fallen when truth had walked in uninvited. Dignity had not been her weapon. It had been her mirror. In it, the powerful had been forced to see themselves clearly. Outside her window, the city stirred awake, unaware that it had changed just a little overnight. Somewhere, Margaret Whitfield rehearsed how to recover her image. Somewhere, James drafted an email that began with Evelyn's name. And somewhere in the quiet between all that noise, Evelyn Cole smiled. Not out of pride, but recognition. Justice had not shouted, and yet the world had heard it all the same. Before you go, take a moment to carry this story forward. Somewhere, someone is being underestimated just like Evelyn Cole was, and they need to know silence can still move mountains. Share this video with them. Be the reason they remember that grace is not weakness. It's power waiting to rise. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.